afraid of.
So where does therapeutic use end and enhancement begins? Once we start correcting, we can easily start improving as well. Where do we draw the line?
It is a very fine line. If you think of every human is perhaps like a masterpiece or a great portrait that has been painted by someone. I think if perhaps that masterpiece got damaged in some way, what would you do to restore it to the original, or how it was originally painted? Well, you can touch up bits, you can repair it in some ways, restore it back to the original. But that would be a sort of an ethical process, and that would be, I would say, that would not be enhancement. That's purely restorative. When you start actually trying to improve the original painting and say, actually, we can do it better, then you're starting to enhance. And I think it's the same principle. I think it's fine to try and restore and use medicine and research and scientific inquiry to go down that route to restore humans to their full potential. But then to go beyond and say, actually, we can make someone better than they were, or to enhance people more, I think that's a step too far.
I'm sure that the line that many people talk about, where we stop at, is a line which is probably flexible, it's fluid. We'd probably not be driving cars around or flying today if people had said in the early part of last century, remember, cars were dangerous, dirty things and they should be banned. Humanity has to progress somehow.
David King is the director of Human Genetics Alert, an independent watchdog group based in London.
This is simply a line which we mustn't cross. If we cross that line, we start doing it for so-called therapeutic purposes, then it won't be possible to prevent people doing it for enhancement purposes in the way that they're already using, surgical technologies, cosmetic surgery, and drugs.
There is a theory that germline genetic engineering might become eugenic if abused. Eugenics is defined as the study of hereditary improvement of the human race by controlled selective breeding. Many negative attitudes towards disabled people are still present in our society.
I think in this country, if you have a disease or a disorder which labels you as someone who is a higher risk category to die, I think it's unfair. It doesn't matter, they don't care whether you're well with it or bad with it, you've got it.
As a disabled person, I would like to see a lot more money, time, effort, and thought going into making disabled people's lives worth living now, rather than worrying about getting rid of us before we're born.
While the medical benefits of human genetics are still mostly in the future, one of the most immediate applications that is being offered is prenatal testing. This procedure allows to screen the unborn baby for any genetic abnormalities to have the answer before it is born. At present, the screening is available for a few genetic disorders, including the Down syndrome. Could this technology be seen as eugenic? Antenatal Results and Choices, or ARC, guides parents through the process of prenatal screening and the choices they might have to make.
I don't think there is a conflict. If you look, as prenatal diagnosis services have developed, so have the rights of people with disabilities. 15, 20 years ago, people with disabilities 30 years ago were put away in homes, they had very marginalised services, they didn't have access to mainstream life or anything. I'm not saying they have full access by any means now, but as prenatal diagnostic services have developed, society has also looked at disability rights. We have Disability Discrimination Act, we have a Disability Rights Authority, all those services there. We're much more discussing about inclusion, about access, about transport, about rights. So I think that the debates have paralleled each other. One hasn't dominated the other, I think they've paralleled. And I don't think that a person making a decision on the level of the individual, in terms of parents prenatally making decisions, in any way devalues the life of a person who lives with limb-girdle dystrophy, as Bill has, or whatever it may be.
If this technology goes ahead, it is likely that the rich will benefit from the genetic engine far more than the poor. The gap in power, wealth and education that currently divides both our society and the world at large could be written into our own very biology.
I think there's no question that it'll discriminate against those who can't afford it. No one's tried to make a serious argument that it won't. We live in a world where, entire continents, Africa, have, at the moment the most substandard health care of the most easy and conventional kind. People dying by the millions of malaria because they can't get $2 bed nets to protect them against mosquitoes. The thought that there are going to be IVF clinics there to be performing genetic enhancement on their offspring is a sick joke. This is a technology for the rich.
There's already obviously some discrimination going on in areas like pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. I mean, that would be the start, really, of discrimination, but there's a lot of potential for it in the future with things like screening for insurance purposes and that kind of thing. But it may not be, there's potential for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to definitely happen if controls can be put in place.
So, who decides what can and cannot be done in terms of regulation?
I mean, it does depend from issue to issue. I mean, in cloning, it's been permitted through Parliament, and it's now run by the HFEA or overseen by the HFEA, and ditto most fertility treatments. Some of the genetics issues, things like genetics and insurance issues is not particularly covered by anyone, but select committees in Parliament have looked at it, and it requires sort of, I think that's overseen by, as there's a kind of moratorium of insurers themselves who kind of put a halt on that temporarily, and so there's sort of a bit of self-regulation there. And other genetics issues, there's there are some committees that oversee it and suggest ways of proceeding, but other than a few laws in Parliament, I'd say a lot of it is self-regulation.
Council of Europe prohibits this germline genetic engineering, but that's not the same as national law. National law in a number of countries does prohibit it, but not in all, and certainly not in the United States at the moment. And so there really needs to be a sort of international consensus if one can be reached around these issues.
Some people think that genetic engineering is playing God. Genes are seen as a sacred domain, and therefore human intervention is unacceptable. Reverend John Springs is a vicar at the Church of England in Harrow.
I believe that trying to manipulate God is a very dangerous and slippery slope that we're embarking on. I think the gift of children is a wonderful creative thing, but to start ordering babies to your own particular gender, some people would regard the birth of a child in whatever form as a gift from God. Down syndrome children have brought great joy and happiness to their parents. I know they can be a real trial and a problem in later life, but it's not the child's fault.